Greetings, fellow adventurers, and welcome to another guide for Pathfinder Kingmaker. Today I'm going to go over a pretty simple video talking about two classes that you can play right out the gate that are very simple classes to play and understand, and that are going to carry you not just in the early game, but also into the late game as well, pretty much regardless of how you build them, and regardless of how well built your companions are, providing you're playing on an easier difficulty, of course. So let's go ahead and look at those classes. So we're going to start a new game. If you are new, I do highly recommend, if you've never played Pathfinder before, that you do actually play on story or easy mode. Because these significantly reduce the amount of damage that you take from enemies. If you're familiar with RPGs, but not the Pathfinder system, playing on easy mode will help you get your feet. And when you feel like the game is maybe getting too easy, you can always turn the difficulty back up later through the options menu. So I don't think this is anything to be ashamed of if you're still learning the game. I do highly recommend that you turn this on. But anyway, so we're going to go ahead and say that we're playing on easy mode. This doesn't affect our character build at all. I just thought I'd mention that. So we are going to create a new character, of course. We'll pick this portrait because I really like this guy's portrait a lot. But anyway, both of the builds that we're going to use today use human. There are a couple of other races that you could use in place of human for this one, but for the purposes of this video, just to keep it simple, we're going to play a human for a couple of reasons. Number one, we get a +2 to any ability score of our choice, which helps us with our build. We get a bonus feat, which will allow us to get extra abilities, and we also get the skilled feature, allowing us to get additional skill points, which is relevant because we're going to be dumping our intelligence on both of these characters. So let's go ahead and look at our class. So the two classes in particular that I recommend for Pathfinder Kingmaker, if you're new to the game completely and you want something that's simple to play and easy to understand, the first class that I would recommend to you is the Barbarian, because the Barbarian is very simple. All you do is you equip a two-handed weapon, you walk up to things, you smash them, and you kill them. And that's pretty much all there is to a Barbarian. It's really easy. And the feats that you can take for Barbarian are really simple to deal with as well. And most of the abilities that you unlock, things like rage powers, for example, are pretty intuitive, and a lot of the things that Barbarians have are passive bonuses, meaning that you don't have to do a lot of active things other than actually activating your rage. But I figured, you can at least click on one button, right? It's not like a fighter where, admittedly, a fighter usually doesn't have to click on extra buttons, but also a Barbarian doesn't really have to either. So that makes them really easy to play and very simple, and also very effective. Barbarians are really great at dealing damage and taking damage, especially depending on which archetype you pick. In particular, what I would recommend for new players is either the stock bog standard Barbarian, works very well. The Mad Dog Barbarian works very well because you get an animal companion, so you pick an animal that fights alongside you, so you get that little bit of extra hit points. You get automatic flanking, because which will help you hit things, because your animal companion will likely be flanking with you. And it's just a lot of extra hit points and damage to add to your current build without losing out on all that much, to be completely honest. And same thing with the Invulnerable Rager. You still get your full rage as a Barbarian, as an Invulnerable Rager, but you get your damage reduction ability much faster, and you also get elemental resistances as well with this archetype. So all three of these Barbarian builds function in different ways, admittedly, but the feats that we're going to take early on are not going to be very different at all. So if you look at these three archetypes and decide which one that you want to do, pretty much all three of these are viable. I don't recommend doing the Armored Hulk, because I feel like you sacrifice too much for the benefits that you get for being that archetype in particular. But for our intents and purposes, we're just going to build a standard Barbarian. But like I said, Mad Dog and Invulnerable Rager are also both really good options. So for our build, we're going to go ahead and distribute our stats as follows. We're going to have a 17 in Strength, a 14 in Dexterity, a 16 in Constitution. We're going to dump our Intelligence and Charisma to bump up our Wisdom to 14. People are going to accuse me of min-maxing here, but as this is a martial class, I don't really consider it to be min-maxing so much as optimizing your build to do what it's actually supposed to be able to do in the first place. And we'll go ahead and we allocate our bonus +2 stat to our strength, because Barbarians are all about dealing physical damage, and they're really good at it. It works in conjunction with our rage ability, so we're going to be able to do lots and lots and lots of damage as we play the game here. As for our skills, you can do pretty much any of these. Lore Nature is a good one. Perception's a good one. Sometimes you can spot traps for your Trap Finder if they fail their save. You can take Persuasion. I don't recommend it since we dumped our Charisma, but if you want to be persuasive in to some capacity, there's a feat called Intimidating Prowess, which lets you add your strength bonus to your persuasion checks. So you don't actually have to have charisma to make intimidate checks, specifically, which is nice. So, this idea that okay, so you're not very charismatic, you don't have much of a personality, or you don't have a very strong personality, which makes sense for a barbarian. But you can still intimidate people because you're big and scary and strong. So if you want to be able to do persuasion in some capacity, you can take the skill. Because we're a human, even though we're at a -2 intelligence, we still get 3 skill points to work with, which is really, really nice. I do recommend taking athletics. Mobility can be nice. Lore Nature is really nice. Pretty much all the barbarian skills are really, really good. For this one in particular, what I'm going to recommend you do is take athletics, Lore Nature, and Perception. These 3 are going to be very useful abilities for a lot of the game, and so I just highly recommend that you take these 3. But there's nothing wrong with the other 2 skills either. Okay, so now for feats, very, very simple feat selection here. There are a few alternatives, but the 2 feats I'm going to recommend for a human are going to be Power Attack. This lets you trade attack bonus for extra damage. If you're using a 2-handed weapon, at first level, if you activate the Power Attack ability, it's a mode that stays on as long as you have it activated, and you can turn it off whenever you want. You get a +3 damage while power attacking, for only a -1 to your attack rolls. And while you're raging, this leads up to have incredible amounts of damage. I mean, you can be doing +10, +11 damage at first level if you take this feat and have it activated while you're fighting, and while you're also raging. You can do lots and lots and lots of damage. Very easy to down enemies this way. And while you're raging, you also get extra hit points. So it's really, really difficult to take you down. The other feat that I'm going to recommend that you take at first level for any of the barbarians, except for Mad Dog, because Mad Dog doesn't get rage to start out with. So for your second feat, I recommend you take extra rage, because starting out you only get 7 rounds of rage or something like that. So at first level, this effectively almost doubles the amount of raging that you can do, which is really, really important for barbarians. That's where they activate their extra strength. That's where they get most of their extra damage. So this is a good feat to take. If you don't want to take extra rage, if you're not as much into that, I recommend taking the toughness feat, because this is going to give you extra hit points that make it harder for you to be taken down, which can be very, very useful. Another feat that you may consider taking is improved initiative instead, because this is going to let you go first in combat, which means that you can charge people before they're ready. You can activate your rage before they can act. You can charge spellcasters, archers, etc. if you get around to the flank, if you have a good initiative roll. So this feat is also extremely useful. But for the Invulnerable Rager and the regular Barbarian, I recommend extra rage to start out with, because rage is just really, really, really strong. So now that we've built this character, it doesn't really matter what we sound like, I guess.
I have no use for this.
We'll be and the other cool thing about these 2 classes is that you can be any alignment that you want to be. You are not restricted to being any particular alignment. For example, paladins have to be lawful good. Druids have to be one of the neutral alignments. Monks have to be lawful of some description. So you're not tied to any alignment, so that when it comes to role playing, you can do pretty much whatever you want, which is great for a first playthrough, because that way you're not locked into options that you don't necessarily want to pursue. All right, so Joe Barbarian here, as we'll call him. As you can see, we start out with a very hefty +5 to hit to begin with, which is very good at first level. This is due to our strength stat and our base attack bonus of 1 that we get for being a barbarian. As you can see, our saves are relatively decent for this level, especially our fortitude save, because that's a good save for us. Our AC leaves a little bit to be desired, and when we rage, we actually lose 2 to our armor, which makes us easier to hit, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, we're going to have extra hit points, so it's not going to be as painful necessarily. So that being said, like I said, this is a great class to start the game with, in my opinion, because It's very durable. It deals a lot of damage. It's very good at taking out enemies. Um, and it really benefits from having a spellcaster that can cast armor spells on them, health spells on them, offensive spells, other defensive spells. It's a very good, it's a very buffable character, and this character is only going to improve as the game goes through, rather than just kind of stagnating. Um, so yeah, that's the Barbarian. That's the first class I recommend because it's not very complicated. All you have to worry about managing is your power attack mode, turning it on and off, and your rage ability, which if you take extra rage, you should have plenty of and not feel too nervous about using it all up when you're fighting battles. So anyway, that's the Barbarian. The thing is, you could read into the stats of all these abilities, but you don't necessarily have to understand that Rage gives you a bonus to attack and damage, but a penalty to armor. It also gives you extra health. That's all you need to know about Rage if you don't feel like sitting here and crunching all the numbers. Power attack gives you extra damage, but makes you less accurate. That's all you really need to know about it. Beyond like what the actual stats do. If you care about the actual stats, feel free to read all of these, but I still recommend playing this class because it is just so accessible. It is so easy to get into and just so very, very powerful. And it will scale so well even later into the game. But anyway, let's talk about the another class that I think is really, really easy to get into. Is very accessible, maybe for people who are more into the magical side of it. And what I will say is also these are designed to be first level feat like characters. You can build your character in a lot of different ways. You won't have to worry about feats again until third level. With either of these classes. So really, once you get your first level build off the ground, the whole point of having these starting builds is that you have a character that is statistically solid before you actually start playing the game. And from there, you can kind of decide what feats you want to take, and it's not going to like impact you as much, I would say. But anyway, let's go back to let's go build our second class, the Sorcerer. So first things first, we're gonna switch to a Sorcerer. Now, for Sorcerer, the archetypes aren't as immediately obvious, I would say. The Imperial Sorcerer has some advantages. The Sage Sorcerer has some advantages. If you don't want to be a standard Sorcerer, I recommend being the Sylvan Sorcerer, because like the Mad Dog Barbarian, it gets an animal companion, which is something that just automatically takes care of itself. You don't have to worry about it so much. And whether you're playing a support or a damaging sorcerer or a crowd control sorcerer, the animal companion is going to be useful basically no matter what. Now, the regular sorcerer, though, I'm going to recommend that you take just because it's very, very simple, easy to understand. And there's a specific cool thing about sorcerers that sorcerers get called a bloodline. And there are tons and tons and tons of different bloodlines to pick from. What I'm going to suggest to you that you take for your bloodline is going to be the Elemental Bloodline. Any of them work. Earth specifically helps you in Act 2 around 5th and 6th level. I won't spoil anything, but suffice it to say that having acid damage is very useful. And so picking this bloodline and also the Fire Bloodline to a lesser extent are both extremely useful for that section of the game. And it won't trivialize it, but it will make it a lot more accessible. Now, so why are we picking the Elemental Bloodlines here? Why do I recommend these four over the other ones? All of these bloodlines get what's called an Elemental Ray that you can do a number of times per day equal to 3 plus your Charisma modifier, which is going to be a +4. So even at level 1, you have a Ray attack that you can do that does a decent amount of damage, and you can do it 7 times a day. So it's basically 7 free spells at level 1. Now this ability doesn't scale that great, but it doesn't need to, because eventually sorcerers get crazy spells anyway. At the time of this release, spellcasters are a little bit bugged in terms of when it actually comes to picking spells, but I'm sure they'll patch that out soon, so if you've read anything about that on like the forums, for example, don't worry about it. The dev team is very, very active about trying to fix those sorts of things. You get the mobility skill from the Elemental Bloodline as well, and this is useful because you can use it to evade combat. There's a button to use the mobility stat to essentially you tumble, right? So you like cartwheel out of combat, and that gets you away from melee attackers who are trying to kill you. So yeah, Sorcerer is a good class because it's a spellcaster, which, you know, could be complicated, right? But the thing that's really, really good about Sorcerers is you just pick your spells, and then you can use them. You can use a certain number of spells per level of spell, So first level, second level, etc. A certain number of times per day. But unlike things like wizards and clerics and druids, you don't have to pick ahead of time before you rest what spells you want to memorize for the coming day. So there's a lot less anxiety when it comes to actually like getting ready for the day with a sorcerer compared to a wizard. And so that's why I recommend the sorcerers, because it's actually really, really easy. It's almost kind of like a MOBA in the sense that like you pick abilities and then you just use those abilities. And then when you're out of energy for the day, you can take a rest. You get all your abilities back, and you can use you can use a spell any number of times that you want to, just infinitely, basically. I mean, obviously you run out of spells for the day, but what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to worry about like, do I want to cast one or two of this spell? Do I want to like if I cast two of this spell, do I give up this spell? You'll have fewer spells to use overall with a sorcerer, like a smaller variety, but the spells that you can use a lot, which is really, really helpful because there's a lot of fighting in this game, and so it's like carrying like extra ammunition into a fight, right? You're going to be able to fight for longer than like a wizard or a cleric could. So that being said, let's go ahead and do our stats. We're going to go ahead and fix what we did from the Barbarian. I almost said fighter, which is not true. So we're going to go ahead and bump our charisma up. We want to get that to a 19. And the reasoning behind a 19, by the way, is that across your total playthrough, you will get 5 stat boosts. So if you take a 19 at the start of the game, by 20th level, you'll have a solid 24, which is, I believe, a plus 8. I think it's a plus 8 to a given ability. No. It's a plus 7. It's a plus 7. Sorry, not a plus 8. So by the end of the game, you'll have a plus 7 to the stat, which is really, really helpful for your spell casting. To be able to, because basically, the higher a charisma you have as a sorcerer, the more spells that you can cast every day. And so you really, want to have a good charisma. If you're one of the other sorcerer archetypes, you might need wisdom or intelligence instead. We're not one of those, so we're going to go ahead and just dump our intelligence because we don't need it. And again, the reason that we don't need intelligence is because having a low intelligence doesn't actually impact us that much in this game. And again, some people are going to accuse me of min-maxing here, but I want to give you a good character to start the game with, that you will feel comfortable playing, that is going to be useful to you, even if you make bad choices later down the line. So we've got our 19 charisma. We want to buff our strength up to 10 so that it's not a negative. And then specifically, we want to get ourselves up to probably a 16 in dexterity and a 14 in constitution. Now, there are a couple of other things that we could do here. For example, we could lower our dex down to 14. Go ahead and give ourselves a 14 in wisdom. This is a more well-rounded build, I would say. This is a build that's going to have, as you can see, much more reasonable saving throws. While still being able to do everything that a sorcerer is supposed to do and having decent enough hit points to actually function. So anyway, that is the sorcerer's, these are the stats that I recommend for a sorcerer. Again, you could have a little bit of a higher dexterity, which is going to give you a better chance to hit with raise, but for the most part, this is going to be completely functional. Okay, so the two abilities that I recommend for a sorcerer are actually tied to their charisma. I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and take Persuasion and use Magic Device. Persuasion lets you pass conversation checks, and you're very, very good at it because your charisma is really, really strong. So this makes you just really, really good at talking to people. Now, use Magic Device. This ability lets you use scrolls and potions, etc. Well, mostly scrolls, to cast spells that maybe you wouldn't normally be able to cast otherwise. So if you make a really good use Magic Device check, you can actually use like a Cleric Scrolls to heal people, even though you're a sorcerer. And another note about the sorcerer is, compared to the wizard, sorcerers can use the same kinds of scrolls. So if they're arcane scrolls, you can still use them as a sorcerer. You just can't learn the spell permanently like the way a wizard can. But that makes sorcerers, again, less complicated, which is why we're picking them in the first place, because we want a class that's less complicated. So anyway, that covers our stat spread, covers our skills. Let's go ahead and move on to feats. Now, I believe we get a bonus feat at first level. I think that's a little bit different than what I was expecting, but that's okay. So, depending on how you want to build your character, I'm going to recommend a number of different feats here. So, if you want to be the I want to just annihilate everything with damaging magic type of sorcerer, what I'm going to recommend to you is take Spell Focus Evocation, and then go ahead and take Greater Spell Focus Evocation. Hold on, I need to change this real quick. I don't think it recommends it off the bat. No, it doesn't. Okay. Let's see. Hold on, it's trying to make me pick a feat here. Well, we don't want that. But let's see, where is it? I think it's hiding. Hold on a second. Okay, so we've got two different ways that we can build this. So in your bonus feat slot, we've gone ahead and chosen the Greater Spell Focus Evocation feat, and in this slot we have a number of different things that we can pick. Point Blank Shot is going to help us build towards a feat called Precise Shot. Precise Shot eliminates a -4 penalty that we take when we shoot at characters that are already engaged in melee combat. This is useful for the main reason of being able to land specifically what are called ranged touch attacks, which are specifically like rays, shooting like a ray of lightning or a ray of acid, as is the case in our class ability, at somebody. And Precise Shot allows us to effectively avoid that penalty, making us much, much more accurate. Point Blank Shot itself isn't shabby at all. Now, the other way that we can build this is to have Spell Focus Evocation and Greater Spell Focus Evocation. And what this does is it adds 2 to what is called the difficulty class of a spell to resist. So basically what this does is it makes it very, very hard to resist your evocation spells. So when you cast a fireball, it's going to be much harder to actually dodge it. And again, I won't get into the actual numbers because this is for people who have just picked up the game, don't care that much about building. And if you want to know what these do, you can look at them later. But just trust me that these are things that are going to be useful. So if you don't want to be a damaging character, say you want to throw that by the wayside, I'll go ahead and give you another option. So this is very much what I would recommend for the damaging build, and what I would actually suggest to take off the bat here. I'm going to need to redo these just a little bit, because you want to be able to take Precise Shot off the bat, and then you would just take regular Spell Focus Evocation. So this is actually what I recommend for the damage dealer. Point Blank Shot, Precise Shot, and Spell Focus Evocation, and then at 3rd level, when you get your first feat, you take Greater Spell Focus Evocation. You are the Blaster Master at that point, and people are going to be very, very scared of you, because you do a lot of damage, and you have a lot of spell ammunition basically to do it. And the further along you get, the more and more dangerous you're going to get, as you might expect, but specifically because you've taken these feats. So there are 2 other types of sorcerer that you could do. I do recommend doing this just because damage is very, very simple. But another very, very simple one, if I may go ahead and clear some of these feats, is you take Spell Focus Conjuration. You take let's see if I can find it, the Augment Summoning feat. This enhances any creatures that you summon. So this is obviously going to be a very, very simple and easy build that you can do, where you summon other things to fight for you, which is very much like the easiest way of playing an RPG, right? Is you just pop something down, it fights for you, you don't have to worry about it as much. This feat is going to be what you want to take in order to be able to actually use that necessarily. Now you can take Greater Spell Focus with Conjuration. There aren't as many Conjuration spells that utilize this, that utilize saving throws, so it's kind of not as useful. So there are a number of different things that you could take instead. What I would suggest is to take the Combat Casting feat, and the reason for this is if somebody gets up in your face and is trying to attack you with a melee attack, this is going to make it so you can still cast spells, because otherwise your spell is going to fail. I think they even get a free attack of opportunity on you if you fail your spell in this game, if you don't make your concentration check. So this is just a very important feat to have in the first place. So taking it is definitely a very good idea. But if you want to go even simpler than that, if you feel like, well, I'm not going to be in the front line all that often with the Summoner build, I would recommend going ahead and taking the Toughness feat. Toughness gives you extra hit points, makes you harder to kill, keeps you in the fight longer, etc. And last but not least is, I won't build it because I don't really recommend it to begin with. If you want to be a mind domination type of sorcerer, what you might do instead is take Greater Spell Focus So spell focus and then greater spell focus with the enchantment school of magic. Simply because if you take them, you get a +2 to the saving throw of enchantments, which is going to make things like sleep spells and things of that nature, anything that like dominates somebody's mind, it's going to make them much harder to resist. Likewise, mastering illusion magic is actually really good to do as well. And again, we're not really getting into too much of the minutia here because we just want a build that's functional, that's gonna work. That is the main thing I'm trying to give you here. This is a build that's going to work out the gate. And we'll go ahead and roll with this summoner when we pick our spells here. Now, if you want to just be survivable at first level, when we take these abilities, all you need to do is take Summon Monster and the Mage Armor feat, or the Mage Armor spell. Mage Armor lets you basically give yourself armor, even though you're a mage and can't wear armor because it makes your spells fail. And Summon Monster, obviously, we want because we took Augment Summoning to start with. So both of these are just really... So this will be like your bread and butter, basically. And because you're an Elemental Bloodline Earth character, because you took that Bloodline, you can still shoot rays that do damage at people. So this is just a very, very solid setup in the early game. And for your second level, because you get one more spell at second level, I'm trying to think here what I would actually recommend that you take. But Shield could be another way of making yourself harder to kill. The Magic Missile spell allows you to just do some damage. There's a lot of different options here, and to be completely honest, there's plenty of things that work. Color Spray works. Enlarge Person is great for your physical fighters. Magic Missile is just automatic, guaranteed, no attack roll damage, which is just very, very nice. Ray of Enfeeblement, Ray of Sickening, Protection from Alignment. These are all solid spells, and a lot of them translate well later into the game as well. So this is kind of the build that I recommend for the Sorcerer in terms of spells, at least to begin with. And as you, again, these are just supposed to carry you through the early game until you get your feet with the game. You start to feel like you know maybe what you're doing, you understand the stats a little bit better, and then you can kind of pick more spells as you go, and more feats as you go. So anyway, this is our character in total as we get ready to actually play the game. And again, we've got our Elemental Ray that we can do 7 times a day, and that only improves with Charisma. It does 1 point extra damage for every 2 Sorcerer levels we possess. So, for example, at 8th level, this is doing 1d6 plus 4 damage. So I can do anywhere from, if I'm doing the math, yeah, so like anywhere between 5 and 9 damage. No, 5 and 10 damage. So that's not bad. That's really not bad at all. For an ability that you can just do in addition to like your actual damaging spells. And these things only get better as time passes. You get the ability to summon elementals later on with this bloodline, which synergizes perfectly with augment summoning. Now, some feats I would recommend taking: improved initiative later on is very, very useful. The saving throw feats, especially will saves and fortitude saves, so great fortitude and iron will are both fantastic feats to take. But apart from that, you're pretty much free to build this character however you want. And again, like with the Barbarian, we can be any alignment that we want. We could be chaotic evil or lawful good as a elemental sorcerer. It really doesn't matter in terms of alignment. You can play this character however you want to play it. You can come up with your own backstory as to why he's able to innately cast these spells as a sorcerer and not feel bad or confined by like moral restrictions the way you would be with something like, again, a paladin, a cleric, or a druid. But anyway, I hope I've made a cogent argument here. I hope that these builds are useful to you in terms of actually building the character. And if you want to see more guides in the future, be sure to just comment, like, and subscribe. And I'm going to keep making these, so stay tuned. I'm going to make all kinds of videos about this game because I know that people are having a hard time, and I really enjoy making these guides. But anyway, thank you for joining me, my fellow adventurers, and I'll see you next time.